Hello, and welcome back to part 2. If you recall, Michael's reading us a story that was the exact words of PG, our guide. And we stopped the story halfway at what I thought was a cliffhanging point, and we've been in suspense ever since. But now I hope Michael's going to complete the story, and perhaps even Jane might say a word at the end as well. So, Michael, over to you.
Thank you. So the passing of Mr. Johnson, the conclusion. Mr. Johnson looks down the path that leads through the park and sees his mother coming to meet him, accompanied by his brother, who died in an accident in his teens, and another man who was a very close work colleague who had died from cancer. He also meets some other people that he has only seen in photographs but recognizes as his great-grandparents. The man in the robes touches him on the shoulder and says, "I will leave you in their care for a while. Enjoy their company, and I will see you in a few days. Enjoy this landscape, and remember there is no hurry, and that everything has to be in your own time." His mother and the group of people take him into a lovely house with a courtyard. Inquiring whose house it is, his mother tells him it is a reflection of the house she lives in on a higher level. Amazed, he says to her, "Mum, it's very exotic, isn't it?" And she replies, "Sometimes I want it to have a Spanish flavour. Sometimes I like it to look Moroccan. And sometimes I like a traditional semi-detached. But it can be anything I want it to be." And so he lives with these people for a few days, during which time they come and go, explaining that they don't really belong to this plane, but that he will always have someone with him. He finds it strange because he wants to sleep sometimes, but can't do so, and they explain to him that sleep here is replaced by what they call a period of inner reflection. They show him what to do, that he has to become quiet, ignore the landscape around him, and then go inwards into his heart-mind. When he does this, he finds that there is a wonderful warm light within himself. It is as though he becomes almost like a statue, in that he doesn't want to move or to think, and yet he can come out of this state whenever he wants to. And then the landscape is there around him once again, and he feels refreshed. For a few days, there is still a need with him to eat. Nobody else does, although his kind friends sit with him and conjure up the illusion of food for him. After a while, he finds that he doesn't become hungry, and it is explained to him that this is just a habit his soul has taken on board because of his incarnation on earth, and that he doesn't need to eat any longer. He lives in his mother's lovely house and finds that, to some extent, he can alter the furnishings. For example, at one point he tries to find a television, and suddenly one appears, and his mother bemusedly tells him that it is merely a construct of his own thoughts, because there is no need for a television here. Sometimes he thinks he can hear cars, but it is only his own mind creating what he had become so accustomed to. After a period of time that, again, he cannot calculate, the man in robes returns, and Mr. Johnson notices his colleague appears to be quite vivid now, and he can see the whole angel who has come to collect him. They enter a wood. In Mr. Johnson's case, it is a wood because he used to like walking through the woods, but the setting could be anywhere. And they walk through it until they reach a central clearing where the three of them sit down on logs. The angel then asks him if he is ready, and Mr. Johnson asks, "Ready for what?" The angel replies, "To review your life and see the high spots and the not so high spots of your recent physical existence on earth." Mr. Johnson is not sure about this, but thinks that he had better honor these people and say yes. As he does so, a sphere of energy appears in front of him. It is strange because he is looking at it, but he is also within it, as though he is experiencing once again the situations that happened to him on earth. He sees and experiences himself as a child. He experiences his first day at school again. He relives the time he went to college. He feels all the emotions of falling in love again. He seems to be lost in his own life, experiencing it from a distance, but also from within it again. But it seems to be moving forwards very rapidly. And there are certain points in his life where he was angry with someone and said something that, on reflection, he shouldn't have said, or has been unkind to people. As he reaches those points in his life for a brief moment, but I must stress, these are only instances where he never realized at the time or sensed that he was wrong. For a brief moment, he becomes the person he hurt and experiences just how they felt when he acted against them. It is devastating and horrible, but he can't stop it. He feels the pain of someone being rejected by him. He feels the pain of being on the receiving end of his sharp tongue. In his life, Mr. Johnson hasn't done anything violent or murdered or robbed anyone, but he has, on occasion, perhaps been a little more verbally brutal in his dealings with people than he should have been, and he suffers now because of it. He is made to realize how it feels, and he is shocked by his own actions. Then his life review rapidly comes to its conclusion, the bubble disappears, and he is sitting there in the clearing in the wood again, a shocked man. The angel surrounds him with love and puts his arms around him, saying, "There is no need to be so tough on yourself. You did what you did. You coped with the earth life as best you could. There were areas where you learned and areas where you didn't learn. You were very kind to some people, but quite harsh to others. We are going to discuss this in the future because the areas where you didn't learn will hold up your progress as a soul and prevent you from reaching the next level. In a little while from now, you will sit with a team of advisors, and it will be decided by you as to the best course of action so that your soul can progress as it is supposed to. Please don't worry. I have seen so many lives unfold that are much worse than the one you have just lived. You have done very little wrong, so don't look so devastated. For now, we are going to take you back to your mother and friends. I would like you to investigate and take advantage of the plane you are on, this between stage, and then we will come and talk with you about your future." And that is exactly what Mr. Johnson does. He goes back to his mother's house and, unaware of the passage of time, he occupies himself by observing the place he is in. He finds it quite strange to see people's emotions written on their sleeves, as it were, for he knows what everyone is thinking by the colours they give out. He sees animals here, and it is as though they suddenly come through a portal. For example, one day a dog appears in the park, fetches a stick, plays with him, and then disappears again. He feels sad that it has gone, but every time he is sad, it comes back. Something within him tells him he has to let it go back to where it has come from. The extraordinary thing about the little dog is that it talks to him. He says to it, not thinking that it could talk back, "Would you like to fetch a stick?" And the dog answers, "Yes, I would." He finds that over the days he can sit on the park bench and, if he longs to see the dog, it will come to him. They have conversations, and he discovers that the dog knows considerably more about this place than he does. It is so fascinating for him to be able to sit with this lovely animal and know that it is safe, that it will never be harmed, and that it is such a wonderful companion. In the park, he sees elementals around the trees, and at first thinks he is dreaming. But as he approaches these little creatures, although he cannot hear their voices, they communicate their emotions to him, so he knows what they are thinking. It is fascinating to see them weaving energy into the bases of trees and stems of plants, colouring the flowers by standing through them and allowing their energies to be transmuted into the petals. He looks at the lake in the park and is fascinated to see people walking on it. He discovers that it can be hard or soft, dependent on what he wants from it. There are beautiful fish in the water with far more striking colours than any fish he has ever seen on earth. They come to the surface and they, too, talk to him. And he is delighted to be able to talk to a fish. He studies the architecture in this place, and it is quite eclectic, with so many different styles and so many different houses. The street is never the same whenever he visits it. Sometimes a house has disappeared, and sometimes a new one has been added. There are always new visitors, and he finds, as time goes by, that he can talk to them and tell them a little about this place and put them at ease, because they, like him, have come from a life in which they hadn't believed in anything and have had to be gradually acclimatized to this between stage on the spirit levels. He begins to love his life because it is so wonderful. Then one day the angel comes back for him, and suddenly, in the middle of the street, there appears a big communal building like a town hall. He walks up the steps with the angel, through the open doors into the lovely building, and finds himself in a magnificent chamber of light, where he sits at a table. In the middle of the table there is a huge book, and seated around the table are various angels and spirits, and he can also sense the presence of a spirit he cannot see somewhere above him. It is quite an informal atmosphere, but they talk for what seems like days to him about his life and show him scenes in the opened book from other lives that were also his, and he remembers them. He remembers being in Egypt. He remembers being a German soldier during the Second World War. He remembers a life further back in which he was a woman. And he remembers many other lives in different areas of the world. It all seems quite clear to him, and he is told that it is time for him to move on to another sphere of existence, and that he can achieve this in one of two ways. Either he can revisit the earth plane, something that has to be his choice but is not recommended in any way for many reasons they explain to him, and experience another lifetime there, or he can work in the sphere he is in now, helping people by being an intermediary when people cross over. This will, as opposed to the option of reincarnation, allow his vibrations to lift up rapidly so that he can enter one of the spheres above the one he is currently staying in. No pressure is put upon him, as it is entirely down to him. He is shown glimpses of the life that he would live on earth should he choose to go back. He would be a doctor and help people, which seems very appealing to him. And he decides that this is what he wants to do, ignoring the fact that a life lived within the effects of the fall is always harmful and traumatic, and that there are many negative and restricting consequences to opting for a further life on earth. Nevertheless, and against his team's advice, this is the painful and dangerous path he decides to take. So, he now enters a waiting period, and as he goes back to the house he has been living in, he seems detached somehow from the landscape around him and from his mother. He becomes more introspective, spending more time visiting that love within him. He spends longer and longer periods sitting on a bench, going within himself, and eventually he doesn't want to come out of that inner feeling and doesn't want to go back out into the landscape. He is bathed in love from within, and he can feel his consciousness mingling with and being absorbed by the light, until he has a sense of just being and not of thinking. And the next thought he has is as a youngster on the earth, being fed by his new mother. It all seems perfectly logical, and he knows who he is as a spirit. Then, suddenly, those memories slip away, and he tries to grasp them, but they are gone. He is concentrating instead on the food he is being given by his mother and on the bright toys on the table, and his memory of the spirit worlds has, for the moment, gone completely. And this is the end of the second part of the passing of Mr. Johnson.
Michael, thank you so much for reading that story from the book. It must have been amazing to receive that all that time ago. That was quite a long time ago. Jane, when did this come through, the story?
I think it was about 2007. It was quite early days. It was a long before we got the Your Life After
2007.
Death. So it was sort of really interesting because there were a lot of revelations in that just went where on it. And it was just fascinating, all the different stages. And I love the bits with the nature and the dog and, you know, just what made you want to go
Molly.
there.
Molly was mentioned even at the
Yes,
beginning.
yes.
Your dog Molly.
The infamous Molly.
Yeah. Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed it. And there is a little bit that follows on after the story, because at that time in 2007, PG asked Jane if she had any questions. And so just out of interest, I thought it would be really nice if Jane was to read those questions now, and Michael can then answer on behalf of PG. And let's see where this goes. Jane.
My first question was, I'm surprised that Mr. Johnson didn't go through the tunnel that some people who have had near-death experiences describe.
And the Persian gentleman's reply was, he went through the tunnel, as some people perceive it, when we talked about entering the bright light with his companion and suddenly finding himself in the other world. I also didn't want to bring through a transition where someone goes over on the boat. Now, the boat is a construct. It is a thought construct that is used to take certain people across. There are many such constructs. There are boats, there are buses, there are taxis, there are aeroplanes, because people who are not expecting an afterlife have to have some sense of transition, of going from point A to point B. And the boat is one of those transition vehicles, if you like. Because the big Indian is going to talk about that. The big Indian is another spirit who talks in many voices, one mission, who gives lectures in many voices, one mission. And the other collection points that are around the earth, for example, some people go to the spirit realms in an aeroplane, as I've just said. I wanted to simplify the process of transition from your side to our side. So I just said that he went through the light and found himself on our side.
And then Jane, you were allowed a second
Another
question.
Yes. He didn't seem to recognise the spirit worlds for quite a while, even though he'd been through that process many times before at the end of his previous incarnations. Was that because he had become so ingrained with the earthly existence in his life as Mr. Johnson?
And here's the Persian gentleman's reply. The physical mind is a very powerful thing. And if you don't believe in an afterlife while you are on earth, minute by minute you are constructing that disbelief around you. People can, in fact, find themselves in a void where they remain for a long time because they have constructed no thing. And so no thing, nothing, is what they find. Eventually, they will hear voices in that void and someone will pull them out, and they will then find themselves in that same way station. I didn't want to frighten people by saying that their own disbelief could cause them a great deal of discomfort when they pass over. People are also frightened of letting go of the earth plane, but what you let go of in the spirit world, you keep forever. So when they let go of the confines of the little physical mind, they suddenly find that they exist more abundantly and have a great deal more to look forward to in their new life. That is why it took some time for Mr. Johnson to come round. A more advanced spirit with a greater soul memory can throw off the earthly persona quite quickly.
And Jane.
And another question I was
You
allowed.
were allowed another one.
Yes.
Yeah.
When people are in their new surroundings initially, does it cause them distress when other people just disappear again, such as when Mr. Johnson was reunited with his mother for the first time and then she suddenly went away?
The Persian gentleman's reply. It is a simplified story, but there is always someone there to advise them and to explain, don't worry, your mother will come back again, but has gone to her own sphere where she needs to live for a while and to rest. So there is always advice, and the moment that a soul questions, the answer is given. Their panic sometimes has to be dampened down so they can hear that answer, but the answer is always there for them, so they are never left alone or ignorant. The time of ignorance was when they were on the earth plane, and that time has passed.
And then the next question asked was, when he saw other people, such as those sitting on the grass listening to the lecture, did they really exist, or was it part of his own construct or illusion?
The Persian gentleman. Yes, he was seeing other spirits, those people that were around him. And one of the things that immediately strikes those who have passed is the great sense of community and love on the spirit side. They may have been isolated on earth, but they will not be so here. On earth, you do not realize that you are linked to each other, but on the spirit side, that instantly becomes apparent. And there is a natural fascination with what other people are doing in this strange land you have entered. So yes, they are real people. The first village was a construct of Mr. Johnson's mind. It is what he believed, so he had to be eased out of that mindset into a true spirit realm. That often takes time and can be quite difficult because people can cross over in distressing circumstances and keep reliving them. For example, Someone can pass in a fire and be reliving that experience of being burned until we can get in, calm them down, and show them that it is an illusion. That may seem unfair, but it is because of the way the mind works. It is also to do with the nature of the earth plane and the consequences of the fall that we keep talking about. There are echoes of that belief still built into people because of what happened in the past. It is a complex subject, but all suffering comes from separation from God. There was a time when man separated himself in consciousness from God. He could not truly do so because he is a part of God. And at that point, he began to suffer. Is it not true that an illness is a separation from the belief that you are whole? And the belief that you are whole comes from the God within you. You cannot be separated from your loved ones, and if you know that you are a part of God and the spirit worlds exist, then there is not that pain because you know you are going to meet them again one day. All pain comes from separation. So when people cross over in distressing circumstances, they maintain those circumstances until we can convince them that they are not separated from peace and from love. And at that point, they become calm again. There is always help for souls who do not realize where they are, and what might seem like years is only the blink of an eye until we can get them out of their mindset and into one of the communal realities.
And that is the end of the story. And that is how a typical trance session works, where in this case PG would ask 4 questions at the end of the session. And in that case, Jane was around to be able to ask 3 or 4 questions. As time went on and there were 4 of us, we'd get 1 question each. So I do hope that's giving you an insight into how it works as far as the Band of Light is concerned. And I do hope that you've enjoyed this wonderful, wonderful story, which is such a good metaphor for what happens when you die. And although it's in Many Voices, One Mission, the big version is Your Life After Death, the book, the bestseller, Your Life After Death, that goes into infinitely more detail. So thank you all for viewing, and it's goodbye from all of us here. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.